Dr. Richard Gibbons from First Presbyterian Church, downtown Greenville, is with us this morning, who had was it just this last weekend?
It was just this last weekend.
This past weekend was a really super huge trip. And where did you go?
I headed to what is known in Scotland as Royal D-side and was a guest of His Majesty King Charles III and Queen Camilla for the weekend. And so that was a little unusual.
That is. I mean, you have this huge invitation. If I understand this right, you performed a service for them?
I did. At this time of year, between mid-August and mid-September, the royal family will vacation in Scotland. And they vacation in Balmoral Castle. And the church next to it is called Crathy Church. And so I was invited to be the guest speaker at Crathy Church, conducted the service, and then afterwards we went over to Balmoral Castle to join the king for a brief reception and some drinks.
Am I correct in the fact that Queen Elizabeth II, that was one of her favorite homes, her favorite castles?
It was, Liz, absolutely the case. It goes back to 1852. Queen Victoria, Prince Albert bought it for her, and the royal family have kept that tradition since then, and Queen Victoria really loved the Scottish Highlands.
Okay, I have to know. Did you stay in an Airbnb or the castle?
What can I tell you? It was a tent, and my legs and ankles were outside the tent flap.
Stay in a tent outside the castle.
The king's inside. You're like, what's up, man?
Come out, have the s'mores. What was that like? I mean, here you are. You're surrounded by royalty, by a private invitation. You're in a castle with royalty. That's got to be so surreal.
Rob, I think I've been thinking since I got the invitation back in early July, and when you receive the invitation, it's a little overwhelming, quite frankly, and you find it hard to process all of that. And it took me about 40 to 45 minutes to realize, oh my goodness, what am I getting involved in here? And of course, I was thrilled skinny. I was just absolutely delighted. And when I went home, I said to my wife, and this is how I broke it to her, I said, you're going to need to buy a new hat.
Oh.
And at that point, she said, okay, what are you talking about? And then we started, and they tell you, you have to treat it with great confidentiality, and you can't tell anyone. My family didn't know, my congregation didn't know, my staff, my closest pastoral colleagues didn't know. And I can only assume they wanted someone with a very rich Southern accent. That's the only reason I was there.
What the Southern Scotland accent.
Oh my God. So I have to know, like, when she understood that you guys, and I'm talking about your wife, that you guys were headed to this service and hanging out with the King and Queen of England, like, did she freak out a little bit? Because I can only imagine.
Sure. She got very quiet for about an hour. And I could see her processing all of the, where will we stay? How will we get there? What will I wear? How many outfits will I need? Do I need to learn to curtsy? What do I say when I engage with members of the family? All of those questions run through your mind, and they all run through your mind at the same time. And that's why it's a little overwhelming.
Right. Dr. Richard Gibbons, pastor of First Presbyterian Church, downtown Greenville, who was personally invited with the royal family to be in Scotland at the castle, do the service. What was the message?
Well, Rob, here is how I approached it. One of the difficulties, of course, is do you focus only on the royal family? And I decided not to. And I think most ministers would do the same. You focus on the congregation, you focus on their needs, and of course, you preach in that broad sense, knowing that the Holy Spirit will take it and apply it to different lives of folks at different ages and stages. Now, for example, I was humorous at the beginning, a little humorous at the end, but in the middle, we looked at Ephesians chapter 3, and we looked at that passage where the Apostle Paul says, I am praying for you and praying that the Holy Spirit will strengthen you in your inner being. And I said, now, if you have been struggling over the last 18 months with a spouse who has dementia, or if you've lost a child, or you've been trying to start a family and it just hasn't worked, how do you begin to wrestle through all of that? And we talked of what does it mean to have deep, genuine faith and prayer that not only do you get an answer to, but the prayer itself, that process matures you makes you grow and develop in your relationship with Christ. So that's kind of where I was at for most of the morning.
And then after the service, you got to spend a little time with the king and the queen. So what was that conversation like?
Well, of course, you are thrilled to be at the service, but in the back of your mind, you know you're going to spend time with the king. There was just 4 of us. The queen was busy elsewhere in the palace, but we spent 25 minutes with the king. And you think to yourself, okay, what shall I say? How will I engage? But he is just outstanding at putting you at your ease. He smiled, laughed. It felt as if I was talking to an old friend. We asked about his coronation. We asked about some of the moving moments for him in that coronation, and he spoke at some length about that. He then spoke about Greenville and the upstate and BMW and Michelin and Boeing and all of that thing. He had done his homework. He wanted to know about the congregation. He wanted to know where their faith was. He wanted to know how are we serving the community. He then talked about his holidays coming up. We talked about his tartan kilt he was wearing. We laughed and joked about family and all sorts of things. And as a dour Scotsman, I'm always suspicious of people when I meet them at first. But I have to tell you, he was just so easy to talk to. Hospitable, warm, engaging. I was so impressed.
Dr. Gibbons, thank you for the time this morning. Next time, can we just hide in your suitcase when you go over?
Please.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
And Rob, if you're ever in London, go to the palace, tell them Richard sent you. They'll know how to deal with you. Don't you worry.
They'll give you a tent.
They'll know how to deal with me.
Yeah, they'll give you a tent.
Or in the dungeon.